I want you to picture, and by the way, I don't do a very good Rod Serling impression, mainly because I don't smoke. But I want you to picture, I want you to imagine, and I don't do a very good John Lennon impression either, so just stop going down that road. Picture, imagine a 2016 presidential election in which there was a liberal Democrat, Hillary Clinton, running against a conservative Republican. Scott Walker, Rick Perry, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Bobby Jindal. One in which issues actually mattered. One in which the conservative movement, the right, was actually represented. And then, as we're going to do in this video, I want you to look at the race we actually have with two New York liberal Democrats running for president against each other, and all the missed opportunities as we saw time after time after time in Tuesday's vice presidential debate. No, Senator Kaine, the Bush tax cuts did not cause the Obama depression. John Hartley at nationalreview.com yesterday. To argue otherwise is, well, it's to put politics before policy. It's also batshit crazy and insane. In Tuesday's Veep debate, Tim Kaine repeated a new economic theory. No, an economic hypothesis. Theories are actually supported by facts. Brought to the national stage by Hillary Rodham Clinton in the first presidential debate, that the Bush tax cuts of 2003 somehow caused the Obama depression. In advancing this assertion, and this is more of an economic segment, so it's the rhetoric is going to be drier. I'll see what I can to moisten it up. In advancing this assertion, neither Mrs. Clinton nor Senator Kaine mentioned government-subsidized housing, i.e. the Community Reinvestment Program, i.e. The subprime loan crisis, i.e. the contagion spreading throughout the financial system thanks to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, a.k.a. the Democrat financial logic bomb that put Barack Obama in the White House and Democrats in unchallenged titanic control of Congress 8 years ago. Indeed, their argument is new because it's stupid, it's delusional, it's counterfactual. So let's fact check it. First, with respect to theory, or rather hypotheses, no mainstream school of economic thought, Keynesian, classical, i.e. capitalist, free market, or monetarist, supports the view that tax relief can create recessions or depressions at all. The Keynesian view argues, that's the left of center view, argues that deficit-financed tax cuts, such as those passed in 2003 under Bush, should provide stimulus to the economy by encouraging spending. Tax cuts provide such stimulus through boosting post-tax incomes, thus giving people more money to spend, which creates more economic activity and income for others. In other words, the demand side argument. This idea is what is traditionally known as the Keynesian fiscal multiplier, and it was a fundamental motivation of the 2009 stimulus package. It's an idea that the Clinton-Kaine theory about the Obama depression rejects. Many economists further argue that tax cuts which benefit the poor and middle class deliver a bigger jolt to the economy because such poorer individuals tend to spend a higher fraction of their incomes. That doesn't mean they spend more of their incomes. It just means, if you have less of an income, any dollar you spend is going to be a higher fraction of it than for somebody who makes more money, has a higher income. The Bush tax cuts of 2003 slashed rates for all tax brackets, but even if they had been geared solely to the rich, Keynesian theory would suggest that they would produce a stimulative impact on the economy, although a significantly diminished one. The classical, i.e., conservative free market and monetarist views argue that only permanent reductions in taxes have a positive impact on wealth in the long run. Why? Incentives. Just as simple as that. Incentives. If you know that permanent tax rate reductions are going to happen, that creates a more favorable economic environment. Businesses, entrepreneurs will be more willing to put their money at risk if they know that they are going to reap more of the rewards for doing so. Supply side economics as opposed to demand side. The Bush tax cuts were allowed to expire after 8 years, so classical and monetary economists could debate whether they count as a temporary fiscal shock or not. But neither school believes that tax cuts have a negative effect on economic activity. Again, it's nonsensical. It's counterfactual. It's important to note that income and wealth inequality are a separate matter, but wealth inequality has increased over the Obama years at 4 times the rate it did under Bush. So what does that tell you? The only plausible economic theory that could support, or the hypothesis, that could support the Kaine-Clinton argument is that deficit-financed tax cuts create recessions or depressions by expanding public debt to the point of fiscal insolvency, as happened in Greece, but then that's what Kaine and Clinton wanted to, as well as Trump and Pence, for that matter. In any case, that's not what happened in the ongoing Obama depression, which began in late 2008 and never ended. Just as mainstream economic theory offers no support for the idea that the Bush tax cuts were responsible for the Obama depression, empirical work on the impact of tax cuts in isolation suggests that they always boost consumption and economic activity to varying degrees. Not just consumption, but also production. University of Michigan economist Matthew Shapiro has found that over the last decade, tax cuts ranging from the initial tax rate reductions enacted in 2001 under President Bush to the 2009 payroll tax cuts under Obama boosted economic activity to varying degrees. It's easy to forget that the American Taxpayer Relief Act of 2012, signed into law by Obama after the fiscal cliff negotiations, actually retained nearly all of the Bush tax cuts for those making under $400,000 a year, only increasing marginal rates on those making more than that. Few argue, and rightly so, that any of these tax cuts are self-financing. Quite the opposite. The continuing trend whereby the government takes in less than it spends has led to perennial deficits for, I suppose the current streak is 15 years, kind of like actually it's the same length of time between the last time that since the last time that the Seattle Mariners made the baseball playoffs. Now, perhaps such deficits could create fiscal drag on growth in the future, but that will only come in the form of higher taxes and continuing economic depression, which again goes to show that tax cuts do not directly spur recessions or depressions. The Clinton campaign's flawed hypothesis of the Obama depression bears many resemblances to the false argument spouted by Bernie Sanders in the primaries, that the repeal of Glass-Steagall created the financial crisis. Anything but what actually did, the Democrat financial logic bomb, turning home ownership into a federal entitlement, outlawing the consideration of risk in mortgage lending. That's what brought about the ongoing Obama depression. Both theories propagate a lie. They're not theories, they're hypotheses. In Sanders' case, the debunked idea that reinstating Glass-Steagall would have broken up the investment banks or commercial lenders that nearly... No, it's the government, it's the Democrats that brought down the system, meant to castigate a particular group for political gain. But while Sanders could ultimately be dismissed as a radical with no shot at power, Hillary Clinton may very well, she will be our next president. Woe be unto us all. So when she argues that tax cuts cause depressions, her argument cannot be allowed to stand. And it wouldn't have been allowed to stand if the GOP had nominated anybody except Mr. Wealth Confiscation Tax himself, not to mention border taxes in the form of higher tariffs and trade wars, Donald J. Trump. Here's another thing about which Tim Kaine was wrong on Tuesday night. Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama squandered George W. Bush's victory in Iraq. American soldiers won the Iraq War, David French writes this morning at nationalreview.com. It was Obama and Hillary who deliberately, pointedly forfeited the fragile peace. In Tuesday night's debate, Democrat vice presidential nominee Tim Kaine defended the indefensible, a strategic retreat from Iraq that threw away the fruits, the hard-won fruits, of American military victory, helped enable a terrifying genocide, and empowered America's enemies. Even worse, he did so while spouting a pack of deceptions and half-truths that exhibited a child's understanding of American strategic interests, or in other words, Trump's understanding of American strategic interests. Where to begin? Well, first, it was stunning that Kaine brought up as an accomplishment America's dramatically reduced overseas deployments, as if the only measure of strategic success is the number of Americans in harm's way. That's the pacifist way to look at it. He said it was a very, very good thing that instead of 175,000 deployed, we now have only 15,000. Well, yeah, I mean, if America's enemies were defeated or contained, although I don't know how you contain them without large American overseas deployments. Instead, American retreat created power vacuums that our enemies filled. Jihadists control more territory, have more men under arms, and are more effectively attacking America and American allies than when Hillary Clinton became Commissar of State. Those are facts that make American withdrawal look less like an accomplishment and more like an inexcusable, cowardly retreat. I didn't use the T word, but feel free to throw it in there if you'd like. Moreover, we didn't have to maintain 175,000 troops in the field to hold on to our hard-won, hard-fought gains. Kaine made the choice binary, maximum or minimum. Kind of like this election. Yet our defeat of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, the precursor to ISIS, was so comprehensive that the presence of only a small number of American combat troops could have prevented the kind of blitzkrieg we saw in 2014, when ISIS overran large parts of Iraq and Syria. There was never a question of keeping massive numbers of troops in the field. The question was whether we keep any troops in the field in Iraq. And the Obama regime said no, because the Obama regime was, is, and always has been on the side of the global jihad. No, that doesn't necessarily mean Obama's a Muslim himself, but he certainly has pro-Islamic sympathy. And that brings me to Kaine's central deception. he still clings to the old discredited line that America had no choice but to pull troops out of Iraq because the Bush-era Status of Forces Agreement mandated their removal. Yet comprehensive reporting in the New York Times and the New Yorker magazine tells a very different story about an administration, a regime that was unwilling to commit the roughly 10 to 16,000, not 175,000, 10 to 16,000 troops needed to maintain stability, and of an Iraqi government that was unwilling to risk political capital at home for the sake of a merely nominal American presence. In other words, both sides blundered, and badly. And there's more than a little question as to whether the then Iraqi government of Nouri al-Maliki wasn't already in the back pocket of the Iranian oligarchy. Now, as any number of strategic thinkers have noted, the results weren't just predictable, they were predicted by none other than President George W. Bush himself. Speaking in 2007 at the launching of the Surge strategy that won the war at the time, Bush said that if troops were withdrawn before commanders said Iraq was ready, then the following would happen. See if any of this sounds familiar to you. It would mean surrendering the future of Iraq to Al-Qaeda. It would mean that we would be risking mass killings on a horrific scale. It would mean we allow the terrorists to establish a safe haven in Iraq to replace the one they lost in Afghanistan. Well, that one was a little bit off. It's also spilled over into Syria. And it would mean that we'd be increasing the probability that American troops would have to return at some later date to confront an enemy that is even more powerful and dangerous. Sounds like 13, 14, 15. Sounds like the last 4.5 years, doesn't it? Sounds like Obama's second term, doesn't it? In other words, all of these things happened, boys and girls. All of them. ISIS has committed genocide. It blitzed through Iraq and Syria, threatening Baghdad and even Kurdistan, and it has created a nation-sized jihadist terror state, larger in territory, Great Britain, and is continuing to expand into Libya, into the Horn of Africa, into Yemen, and Afghanistan, don't forget that. ISIS is larger and more powerful than Al-Qaeda ever was. Thanks to Barack Hussein Obama, Hillary Clinton, and now, by extension, by association, Tim Kaine. The idea that Kaine could look the American people in the eyes and declare that any part of this represents anything less than catastrophic failure is well, no, it's really not all that astounding when you when you stop and think about it. Consider the source. One of the most important jobs of the debate, Mike Pence, the Republican presidential or vice presidential nominee, reminded Americans of the human cost of this disaster, telling the story of Lance Corporal Scott Lubowski, who fell in Fallujah in 2005. He gave his life in a long struggle that by 2009 had been won. And then Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton squandered that victory deliberately. Those of us who deployed to Iraq, Mr. French writes, remember many more names of fallen brothers, and they also remember the other profound costs in their lives. The physical and psychological wounds, the fear, the lost time with families that most civilians can't imagine. Obviously, a nation should not make a strategic mistake simply to honor soldiers' sacrifices, but when a strategic mistake also undermines those sacrifices, it compounds the injury all the more. And Operation Iraqi Freedom was not, repeat, not a strategic mistake. Their strategic mistake was not expanding it to Syria and Iran, making a clean sweep of the Middle East. I'm not naive. I know that Tim Kaine wasn't going to own Hillary's failure. I know that he was going to spin just like Mike Cuck Pence wasn't going to own his disgrace in selling out to Trump. He was going to be delusional and try to defend the indefensible. Or as French put it, in much the same way that Pence spun and denied Donald Trump's manifold deficiencies. But neither Mrs. Clinton nor Barack Obama can be permitted to escape responsibility. They didn't just fail. They betrayed their own country. And the human and strategic cost of that betrayal is staggering. Our soldiers won the war. Our politicians sold out to the enemy. They cannot be permitted to boast about their blunders, or they wouldn't have been able to if the Republicans hadn't nominated Donald J. Trump. I trust you can see the pattern that is developing here. One missed opportunity after another. One issue after another on which Mike Pence wiped up the floor with Tim Kaine, and yet it won't matter. Because there's only one issue in this election, and that is Donald Trump. And if Donald Trump were to somehow win anyway, he wouldn't do anything about all these failures, these betrayals of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. He would double down on them. He would expand upon them. Donald Trump is no better than Hillary Clinton, and arguably even worse. And yet we're not talking about it, and we're not going to talk about it. All these missed opportunities on tax policy, on economic policy, throwing away the victory in Iraq. How about this one? Ian Tuttle writes about it at nationalreview.com yesterday. Tim Kaine's claim that Hillary Clinton destroyed Iran's nuclear program is preposterous. Yeah, I'd say that's right. Even defenders of the Iran deal don't attempt to claim that it stopped the program because the deal was designed to expand the program. It gifts U.S. nuclear weapons to the Iranians. They don't even have to make their own nukes. On a night awash in lies, offensive lies, defensive lies, primitive lies, he never said that, regarding Trump, and sophisticated lies, the Clinton Foundation, ... You don't even have to go any further than those three words, do you? Perhaps the boldest lie was this. Hillary Clinton eliminated the Iranian nuclear weapons program without firing a shot? What? So said Tim Kaine, Mrs. Clinton's running mate, multiple times during Tuesday night's vice presidential debate. An Iranian nuclear weapons program has been stopped. No, it hasn't. It's been expanded. Hillary built the sanctions regime around the world that stopped the Iranian nuclear weapons program. No, it didn't stop shit. It expanded it. We stopped the Iranian nuclear weapons program. The hell we did. We expanded it. We accelerated it. We made it bigger. Kaine made these BS declarations in one or another iteration 8 separate times. Pity he couldn't have been struck by lightning 8 separate times. To steal a line, there are lies, damned lies, and what Tim Kaine said on Tuesday night. The Obama regime, eager to have its Nixon and China moment, which that analogy doesn't really fit because, Nixon was perceived to be an enemy of the Chi-Coms, hence Nixon going to China. Whereas nobody ever, for a moment, Barack Obama has been anywhere other than bowing down before Ali Khamenei for the past 8 years. The Obama regime is dedicated to the myth that by combining honeyed tones with a few firm glances, it persuaded the mullahs in Tehran to abandon their dreams of obtaining nuclear weapons and endorse a peace-loving cosmopolitan global order. Another exercise in self-delusion. And Barack Obama's telling John Kerry and Mohammad Javad Zarif shook hands, and now daffodils are springing up through the sidewalk cracks in Tehran.
Bullshit! 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 Bullshit!
You're not telling the reason to play.
Bullshit! Let's go bullshit! Let's go bullshit! Let's go bullshit!
In point of fact, the Iranian nuclear deal was a sham from beginning to end. The terms of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, acronymically speaking, let alone the way that the Obama regime has selectively interpreted and downright ignored them, were absurdly and traitorously generous. The JCPOA, sounds Klingon almost, allows for the continued enrichment of uranium as well as the continued operation of more than 5,000 centrifuges and includes permissions to build more advanced ones. Iran is also entitled to continue operating a heavy water reactor capable of producing weapons-grade plutonium. Furthermore, the monitoring regime that the Obama regime has touted is largely toothless, applying only to declared nuclear sites. And the quality of those inspections, quote-unquote, was on display last year when Iranian officials were permitted to collect soil samples at the Parchin military base without any International Atomic Energy Agency officials present. In other words, this deal is so absurdly lopsided in the mullahs' favor, they almost have to try to cheat on it. It may not be possible to cheat on this deal. It's so lopsided in Tehran's favor. Although I have no doubt they'll manage it anyway. But even if the original terms of the deal had been agreeable, the regime has proven that it has no intention to abide by them. On January 16th, implementation day of the JCPOA, John Kerry announced that Iran had fully implemented its required commitments. Fully implemented its required commitments, enabling Tehran to receive $150 billion in sanctions relief and other benefits. Well, nonsense. Knowing full well that Iran was not in compliance with the terms of the JCPOA, and desperate to avoid the embarrassment of Iran's withdrawing from the deal if called on their violations, the Obama regime used the JCPOA Joint Commission, composed of representatives from Iran and the agreement's 6 signatories, 5 world powers and the United States, to quietly exempt Iran from certain requirements. Likewise, Barack Obama wanted his Neville Chamberlain moment. Likewise, the U.S. acceded to Iranian demands to limit the IAEA's reporting on Iran's nuclear program on the grounds that Iran had complied with the JCPOA, even though it hadn't, so it could be trusted, even though it can't. In other words, the United States did the foreign policy equivalent of a judge's announcing before the trial starts that a criminal defendant is innocent, so no witnesses need testify. And of course, this whole charade is temporary. It's allegedly, purportedly designed, it isn't really, but it's purportedly designed to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons within the next 15 years. Of course, they have nuclear weapons now, I will guarantee you that. What happens after that is anyone's guess. No, not really. Gee, 15 years now, Iran's gonna have 10 times the nuclear arsenal the United States does. But even if the JICPOA does what it's supposed to, it's not exactly difficult to predict what will happen when its terms expire. And it won't do what it's supposed to, so you don't even have to worry about that construct. Even Barack Obama has admitted that at the end of year 13, 14, 15, the time needed to enrich uranium per nuclear warhead would shrink from 2 to 3 months almost down to 0. And that's a good thing in his eyes. Because, you see, it's the United States that needs to be deterred. Remember, the greatest threat to world peace is America. America is the focus of evil in the modern world. My legacy will be in America reduced to the level of the rest of the world. Remember, that's Barack Obama's legacy right there. He said it himself. I didn't make it up. So Hillary Clinton hasn't eliminated a damn thing. She hasn't even delayed it. She has hastened it. She has accelerated it. And we know what the mullahs are going to do with it. Right? Far more likely, though, given Obama's numerous derelictions of duty and Iran's knowledge that it has the whip hand in this arrangement, that's putting it mildly, euphemistically, is that she has helped to reinvigorate a regime that was growing weak. As the 2009 Green Revolution in Iran suggested, you know, the one that Hillary and Obama, breathless about the so-called Arab Spring in 2011, were completely unresponsive to. And tens of thousands of Iranians took to the streets to protest Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's fraudulent re-election victory and were brutally mowed down and wiped out, murdered in the process. Obama just sat back, did nothing. Yeah, we all know why, don't we? At a time when sanctions had put a decisive strain on Iran's economy, well, that's debatable, the Obama regime offered Tehran a lifeline by removing the sanctions, thawing out long-frozen Iranian assets, and facilitating Iran's reintegration into the global economy that they are going to destroy. If they can beat Hillary or Trump to the punch, anyway. And it compounded a material victory with a psychological one, offering a $400 million ransom for the safe return of American hostages, whose release should have been an upfront sine qua non of any nuclear agreement. In other words, we're not even going to talk to you unless you release the Americans you're holding prisoner. $400 million. Remember what Iran-Contra, remember what that was about? Trading arms for hostages. And that was a huge Reagan scandal in 86 and 87. Remember that? Is there any difference between trading arms and just writing a check? How is this not a scandal? Will it be a surprise to anyone when the Swiss francs that the CIA flew into Tehran in crates in January end up purchasing arms for Hezbollah and warheads that create mushroom clouds over American cities or Israeli cities? More like I guess. Even European cities. They will. Count on it. Meanwhile, Kaine speaks about the threat from Iran as a thing of the past. the latest obsolescence thrown onto the ash heap of history. Iran's nuclear program has been eliminated decisively, like the Soviet Union or the Nazi war machine, which, if he'd been around at that time, he would have called throwing the Soviet Union on the ash heap of history warmongering that was going to bring about World War III. The reality is Ronald Reagan threw the Soviet Union on the ash heap of history. The Iranian, or the Islamic Empire of Iran is just getting started on its conquests and swath, blitzkrieg of nuclear destruction, courtesy of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. More Obama than Hillary, but mindset is the same. American voters are not fluent in the details of the Iran deal. That's largely because it's all secret and the Obama regime won't reveal any of it, won't make any of it public. I mean, that's why they tried to claim that it was an agreement, not a treaty. And Congress forfeited their Article 2, Section 2 treaty ratification powers to let him do it. But American voters do have general impressions of the state of our national security, as in, ah! And those impressions are neither positive nor wrong. Or, in other words, ah! Run for your lives! They recognize that we are less safe, vastly, dramatically, multiple orders of magnitude less safe than we were the day George W. Bush left office. And they know that Iran is our mortal enemy. Donald Trump is not remotely prepared to address the intricate, complex questions that determine America's national security, and neither is Hillary Clinton. She and Tim Kaine have opted to pretend that an entirely real threat simply isn't. Exactly like Mike Pence pretending that Donald Trump isn't Benito Mussolini. When Iran decides to upend this fantasy in the midst of a Clinton presidency, which is going to come to pass, the damage, well, hell, forget the damage to our politics, the damage to our country and the world and our allies will be incalculable, outmatched perhaps only by the damage to our security and our very souls. One more thing that could have been avoided by not nominating Donald J. Trump. So many missed opportunities, one right after the other. Economic policy, domestic policy, foreign policy, national security policy. And how about social issues, like Tim Kaine's abortion dodge, as Kevin Williamson discusses this morning at nationalreview.com. You know, as it turns out, there are pro-lifers who are not Catholic. Holding up my hand, in case you're wondering. Did you know that the study of cuteness is a legitimate and rather busy field of academic inquiry? It's not as trivial as it sounds. The features that constitute cuteness and the response of human beings to them are nearly universal. And there's a reason why so many cat pictures are posted on social media. Cuteness is partly related to infantile physical features. Babies are cute for the same reason that puppies and kittens are cute, and is heightened or triggered by certain contexts, such as helplessness or distress. That is why the baby with the bowl of spaghetti upturned on her head is cuter than babies in other contexts, and why sad and penitent-looking puppies and kittens are cuter than puppies that are ripping the stuffing out of something living like the natural carnivores they are, and kittens are cuter than, or penitent-looking kittens are cuter than kittens that are tearing up your furniture with their claws and ruining your carpet by pooping and peeing outside the box. Now, cuteness brings out our protective paternal and maternal instincts, in light of which fact the cult of kawaii in aging, childless, sterile Japan is less evidence of pop culture eccentricity than it is the bright and cheerful wrapping paper around a parcel of profound and mortal sadness, a self-bought birthday present for a nation of cat ladies. We feel protective toward that which is cute. And those who study evolution are fools, because evolution is a myth. But they believe that this serves an obvious adaptive purpose, that we, as families and as species, are better off when adults are instinctively protective of the young, the tiny, and the vulnerable. This is so deeply ingrained in us that we do not need to be taught it. The Apostle Paul had not heard of DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, for those of you in Murrieta, California, or natural selection, which is a myth, but perhaps he had it about right when he wrote, well, of course he did, because it was divinely inspired by the Holy Spirit, when he wrote of those who had not been instructed in religious law, who nonetheless were bound by the law written in their hearts by God. Now, Tim Kaine apparently is blissfully unaware of the fact, but it is a long part of the Christian tradition, and especially prominent in the Catholic tradition, that the basic facts of the universe, physical and moral, can be discerned through the light of human reason, independent of religious revelation. In his famous Notes on the Bible, the American Presbyterian minister Albert Barnes expands on Paul's language. Quote, "The revealed law of God was written on tablets of stone, and then recorded in the books of the Old Testament. This law the Gentiles did not possess, but to a certain extent the same requirements were written in their hearts. Though not revealed to them as to the Jews, yet they had obtained the knowledge of them by the light of nature. The word hearts here denotes the mind itself, as it does also frequently in the scripture itself, not the heart as the seat of the affections. It does not mean that they loved or even approved of the law, but that they had knowledge of it." Romans chapter 1 as well. "And that knowledge was deeply engraved on their minds." Close quote. The idea was an ancient one by the time Paul got around to writing his letters, and it is by no means a uniquely Christian concept. Marcus Aurelius understood it well. Or a European one, as the thought of Siddhartha Gautama shows. It is not even the exclusive property of the religious and the spiritual. The famous atheist Ayn Rand argued throughout the entirety of her tedious oeuvre that morality is not merely a question of opinion, but a discoverable facet of the reality in which we live. Of course, we know who put it there. God. Jesus Christ. Intellectually, Tim Kaine's argument about abortion is incoherent and indefensible. It is, in fact, illiterate. He argues that while his own Catholic devotion points him in a pro-life direction, what Christian devotion? The fact that we are a pluralistic society with a constitutional guarantee of religious freedom precludes him from supporting initiatives that would enshrine certain Catholic preferences in law. Of course, that didn't stop him from campaigning against capital punishment and from using his gubernatorial powers to that end on the same grounds. And besides which, the Catholic position on the death penalty is not absolute, and given the history of the Church, hardly could be. Its prohibition of abortion is absolute. any more than the First Amendment has stopped any cookie-cutter communist with an Italian or Irish surname from citing the example of Jesus when arguing for this or that social welfare program, never mind for the moment that this misconstrues that example. Back in the ancient days when he was running for president, Barack Obama cited his faith in himself in explaining his the opposition to Sodom marriage that he never actually believed in or held. But it is not the hypocrisy that rankles so much as the stupidity. There are millions, perhaps billions of people on this planet who oppose abortion who are not Catholics, who are not bound by Catholic practice, who are not informed by Catholic teaching. There are pro-life Jews, pro-life Protestants, pro-life Mormons, pro-life Muslims, though those who denounce the so-called religious right as the Christian Taliban would do well to appreciate how liberal Sharia actually is on the question of abortion. Pro-life Hindus, pro-life pagans, pro-life agnostics, pro-life atheists, pro-life chiropractors, pro-life witch doctors, pro-life astrologists, pro-life chiromancers. I mean, Kevin Williamson's friend and colleague Charles Cook, whose thoughts I've heard in many a video and on many a podcast, the Hard Starboard Radio channel on YouTube, the Hard Starboard Radio podcast on blogtalkradio.com, blogtalkradio.com/HSR network. He's a pro-life non-believer. I very much doubt that I am the only person in the world who is Christian, or in Kevin Williams' case, Catholic, in part because he is pro-life and not the other way around. Williamson's religious views have changed over time, but his opposition to abortion never has. One of the things that drew him to the Catholic Church years ago was the mystery of how that particular corporation, practically alone among the important institutions of the world, fully appreciated the inhumane violence of abortion, understood the ways in which that violence echoes far outside of the local Planned Parenthood abattoir, and placed that knowledge at the center of its public affairs. Tim Kaine's understanding of the teaching of the church to which he purportedly belongs is, properly understood, not religious, but rather superstitious. The Catholic view is not that a thing is true because the church teaches it, but that the church teaches it because it's true. God's inerrant, holy, revealed word. It's a reason why God himself wrote the Mosaic law on those stone tablets, ladies and gentlemen. And there's a reason why God became man in the person of Jesus Christ. The difference is profound. It is the difference between something being true for Catholics and just true, period. Objective truth. Not relative, absolute. Tim Kaine has it exactly backwards. It may be that one needs to be pro-life to be Catholic. Perhaps the most Reverend Francis Xavier, Charles Francis Xavier? No. Francis Xavier DiLorenzo, Bishop of Richmond, Virginia, has some thoughts on the matter he'd like to share with the congregation entrusted to his care. But it is indisputable that one need not be Catholic to oppose the horrifying brutality of abortion. We do not need to be taught this in Sunday school. Emotionally normal and mentally stable human beings do not need to be taught that butchering babies is wrong at all. We naturally recoil from it. Of course, Donald Trump doesn't. He thinks Planned Parenthood is doing great work. Well, that's another one of those things that Trump said, but Mike Cuck Pence wants you to believe somehow didn't happen in a parallel universe. That people understand this instinctively is why abortion advocates in places such as Colorado have, First Amendment be damned, prohibited abortion protesters from displaying images that simply make clear what it is that an abortion does. Death and dismemberment. The evil of abortion does not need to be explained to a functional adult any more than does the cuteness of a baby. Kaine's silly and illiterate arguments notwithstanding, it is the pro-abortion side that has retreated into convenient metaphysics, the nonsensical issue of personhood, while the pro-life side is content to deal with the biological facts of life. In other words, that what is present in the womb of a pregnant woman is not a rutabaga or a catfish. Genetics, ladies and gentlemen? Science? Because science! I know I don't really look much like Kyle Hill, but still. On the subject of abortion, Tim Kaine is a mess intellectually and a coward morally. That some people find his argument persuasive is only another sign of how attenuated we have become nationally in our facility for reasoned argument. The facts of abortion are the facts of abortion, irrespective of what any pope, president, governor, senator, or mere justice of the Supreme Court says. Being Catholic, Christian is one reason to oppose abortion. Being a human being is another. Tim Kaine, a cheap and shallow sophist, isn't a particularly inspiring example of either. But it won't matter. It's one more missed opportunity. Because the only issue in this election is not abortion, not tax policy, not economic policy, not foreign policy, not national security policy, not immigration policy, but the man who never should have been nominated in the first place, Donald J. Trump.